record to the cloud. Hi.
Can you hear me, Monique? Just make sure you go to the top.
Margaret, after you introduce yourself, I'll put it up to full screen.
Yep. Shh. Shh. He hears the other dogs barking. We'll give it about 2 more minutes, Monique, and then looks like it's slowing down.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right. All right, I think the entry is kind of slowed down, so we'll start. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Margaret Marchand. I do hold a position, an elected position on a school board, but I am here tonight as myself. I'm representing myself as a mother, as a New York citizen who is really just here to educate other New Yorkers about the process of what's going on in our state right now in order to regulate laws, basically, and also how the state is pushing through law-like regulations and how it's connected to last week's Supreme Court decision and how important it is that all New Yorkers are aware of it all. So I just want to welcome everybody. I just want to say that I am just the vehicle. There are a lot of women, predominantly women, but men too, that are working behind me, putting the screens together, the slides together that you're going to see tonight, doing the technical end of things, running the Zoom, meeting every single day. Some people are doing this, no joke, from dawn until dusk and actually till midnight. People are working around the clock as if it's a full-time job because it's that important. And we all realize that it's It's come down to this. It's come down to that we all have to fight together in order to save the sanctity of our state, the republic of our Constitution and our country and our state, and save, the life that we want to live here in our state. So with that, I just want to ask Monique. I think all of a sudden we got a little influx, but I think we're going to start anyway. Monique, if you can just go to the slideshow and we'll get started real quick. I'm going to try and speak very quickly to get through it because I know everybody's busy, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time to pop in on a Sunday night before your week starts. But I really, I'm going to speak fast, but I want you to know that everything is being recorded and everything on the slideshow will be able to be accessed at the People's Coalition for FOR New York.org afterward. There is a video of this presentation last week, which was different. It was more focused on the schools and the 2.60. Tonight's presentation is going to be a little bit more geared towards the regulation process and the Supreme Court decision and how they intertwine. So it's here for you. It's a resource for you. I learned today from the tech guru that this is an interactive PDF. So when you go to the People's Coalition for New York website, if you don't click on the actual YouTube and listen to the recording of tonight's meeting or last week's meeting, you can actually go onto the PDF. And as you'll see tonight, there are links. All of those links are live. So everything that is presented tonight, there's going to be a live link source to it. Most of it is government links that you're going to be taken to, but you can do your own research. So I am going to move quickly, but you can always go back and find out what you need. And I'm really going to try and break it down into, layman's terms. All right, so I already introduced tonight's meeting. If we can go to the next slide, Monique. I wanted to start tonight off with something that I have been saying for the longest time. From the minute that this started, all of our concerns, I think, that are on here tonight has been the children and what type of normalcy. I don't believe in the new normal. The new normal is not something that I'm ready to grasp, and it's not something that I'm ready to impose on the children. Our children should not have coverings on their face. That is my personal belief. It has been my mantra. It has been what I stood for from day one. The restrictions that are still in the schools, if you're not in the schools, if you don't have children in the schools, you truly don't even know what's going on in there. People are still fighting in this state for their children to eat lunch at a lunch table with their friends without a mask. There are some districts in the state that still are taking turns in a row in a classroom to eat snack with desks that are, 4 or 5 feet apart. One row can eat, the other row has to wait. Then it's the next row's turn. The same thing is happening all over in auditoriums. There's spacing between rows. They're still spacing the kids everywhere. It's not healthy. It's not normal. And it's really impacted the kids. And this graph, this is why I wanted to start with this. If you go to the bottom of it, if you have a second grade child in the state of New York, they have never, other than maybe this past Tuesday, never gone to school without a mask. They have never seen the joy of another human being's face. They have never seen a teacher or an adult or an authority figure, a lunch lady or a bus driver's face. They have never experienced human socialization at a normal capacity. And go up to the top, the 12th graders. The last time that they had a normal experience, they were in 9th grade. They've never experienced high school without all of this. And they have gone, from not having sports, not having theater, to then bringing it back. I just saw a photograph today of a middle school theater performance. All the kids are in masks on the stage. These are kids that are with each other every single day. So I just need everybody to really look at how impactful this is. These children are at the most vulnerable points in their lives, all these age ranges. They are growing, developing, socialization, mental development, academic development. And anybody with a disability is extremely, has other issues because they're not even getting their services correctly because of, these restrictions. So I just needed to start tonight with everybody kind of thinking about the schools. And after that, we're actually not even going to be talking about the schools, but I needed just everyone to see that. Next screen, please. Tonight's event is hosted by the People's Coalition for New York. I already gave you, their link to their website. These are all of their contacts through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and they have a website. They are an organization that was a brainchild of somebody other than myself. And they basically decided that all of these smaller groups that are working for a common goal, they may have different backgrounds and they may have different belief systems, but the common goal is to free all of us in the state, especially our children. They all should be in contact with each other and share resources and basically have a landing site. And that's what the People's Coalition created. They started before the rally up in Albany, and they have grown, and they have, I want to say, some upwards of 80 groups that are underneath their umbrella, and all the groups keep their identity and keep their own work, but they all just kind of use this as an information highway. So I highly recommend, if you are a group that isn't associated with this, please log on today, tomorrow, and start connecting with the People's Coalition. Next. So I wanted to just really give you a quick recap of the purpose of tonight is that, for lack of a better word, we are literally living under tyrannical rule. And I know sometimes that word tyranny strikes people odd. How could we be living in tyranny? We're Americans, we have a constitution, we live in America, but we are. And tyranny really is sole rule. The way that our government in the state of New York has operated for the past 2 years has been by sole dictatorship, sole rule. And that rule is coming out of the executive branch, which is the branch, it is elected officials, it's the governor. So I just wanted to really very quickly go through the progression and how we got here. Because right before we got on, we were having a talk about how it always comes in increments, like little increments. Oh, we gave this up. Okay, well, it was okay because we wanted to make sure everybody was safe. And then we gave that up. Oh, but it's okay, we can live with that. And then we give this up. So I need you to see the progression of how the executive branch took away all of our rights and our freedoms, and especially for our children. And then we'll go into how it was illegal, unlawful, and unconstitutional. Back in March of last year, the legislative branch, which is our other branch of government, we have the legislature, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, 3 branches of government to keep the checks and balances so that not one branch can wield too much power. That was in our Constitution. That is how our country is operated. And it keeps everything up and on, honest. Last March, they took away Governor Cuomo's executive powers. They had granted him at the beginning of the pandemic full reaching power. And last March, they lawfully took it back. And they said, you know what? This is too much. We've given you a year. Now we have therapeutics, we have vaccinations. We don't need this type of all or nothing rule. We need to go back to the checks and balances. That retrieval of the powers, the executive powers, was to the seat. It wasn't just to Governor Cuomo, it was to the seat, the governor's office. Come around, if you look to the top box, if you just follow the arrows, August 27th, Governor Hochul knows that she doesn't have these executive powers and says, I'm going to direct the Department of Health to institute a determination. On the onset, it has been believed that this determination was never had legal backing. And we'll come around to that when we talk about the Supreme Court decision. She used a determination through a sanitary code. She basically gutted a sanitary code and put in all of this new wording and masked our children through this code. It's 10 New York Code Rules and Regulations. That's what NYCRR stands for, 2.60. About 10 days later, not even, she calls the entire assembly back for emergency session. Everybody had to come back to Albany to vote. And they had to vote on the moratorium for rent forgiveness because that's a law, real estate law. She never brought to the assembly, hey, I have this mask law that needs to be, I was using a determination over here, let's make it into law. She never did that. And neither did any other elected assemblyman or senator. Nobody said, hey, wait a minute, we need to make this a law so that it's legal. They just left it as a determination. In October, the New York State Department of Education granted another emergency regulation, and that one was to give all the power to nurses in your schools to give shots on campus. In November 3rd, they then decided, you know what, we need this emergency rule to be permanent. So we're going to put it through this process called SAPA, which is the way that they change a regulation. And we'll get to that later. In November the 24th, our extension for 2.60 was expiring, and they said we needed to extend it. They never went through the proper process for extending it. In December, they then came down with a brand new amended determination 2.60, where they slipped in taking away mask breaks for every child in the state of New York. And they also put in the indoor mask mandate that she uses a different expiration date for, all within the same determination. Right after she did that, they realized, hey, you know what? We want this to be more of a permanent thing. We can't keep doing these emergency regulations. Eventually they expire and we can't legally keep renewing them. So on December 15th, they filed for face coverings and a whole other list of things we're going to get into through the SAPA process, which is the process that you go through to change regulation and make it permanent. And they started following the process to make face coverings permanent. January 6th, we had Bruce Blakeman, the county executive of Nassau County, filed 3 executive orders. All 3 of them were in defiance of 2.60, but Governor Hochul has only decided to fight the one that has to do with the children and the masking. On January 20th, despite a ton of threats from the governor and from the State Department of Education, Massapequa School Board voted to make masks optional at the expiration of 2.60, which is February 21st. And then we come to our Supreme Court decision this past Monday, which changed everything. We'll get into that more. And then we had the stay on Tuesday. And now on Friday, we had 16 school districts join with an amicus brief to support the Supreme Court's decision. Also not on here because we just got word 12 elected Republicans in, I believe, Nassau and Suffolk also wrote a letter that's going to be adjoined with the stay, so that the judge can see that elected officials are concerned now because this Supreme Court decision affects elected officials. Next slide, please. This just talks about how Governor Cuomo's executive powers were taken away and they do not transfer over to Hochul. Next slide. Again, these are all here for you to go back and do a little bit of a deeper search. This is explaining Bruce Blakeman's executive order, and it was a call to action to ask other county executives to stand with Bruce, and also a call to action to go to your boards and ask them to take a vote. The executive order didn't say take the masks off the kids. The executive order brought the power back to the boards, where it lies, where it should lie, because that is how a republic works. And if you get a chance, I don't think it's in here, the executive order is very much written in a constitutional wording, that there is no way that you take away people who are elected to represent people. You can't take away their right to vote and their right to not make a decision based on their constituency. And that's what the governor's trying to do. I just actually quickly want to, in this, if you can just look at this, because it's going to tie into the next slide. When you follow 2.60 and you mask up children and you mask up people in the state of New York and in hospitals and in jails, and you 2.62, you force teachers to either get a vaccine or test, and 2.61, which is quarantining people, you are violating all of those codes and constitutional rights. You violate the 9th Amendment, the 14th Amendment. You violate the US code. I can't even read it. I'm sorry. All of those codes there. And no one seems to care that we're violating law and codes. You violate the Constitution. You violate New York State human rights laws. You violate public health laws because you're actually forcing kids to wear a mask, which is an emergency use authorization device. Next slide. And that brings us to Betty Rosa, because when January 6th happened and Blakeman said, you guys have the right to vote, go back and vote. I don't care what the vote is going to be. The vote might be stay with the masks. The vote might be take the masks off, but you have the right to vote for your constituents. Betty Rosa came up and said, no, that's not right. Bruce Blakeman doesn't have that power. Hochul said Bruce Blakeman doesn't have that power. School boards must ignore an executive order. And if you look at the highlighted, it says that she expects that all boards will follow all legal requirements. Well, why is she only concerned about the legal requirements that she likes? Legal requirements are legal requirements. You don't get to pick and choose which ones you want to choose, which ones you want to follow. Next slide, please. So last Monday, the unexpected happened. A lawyer, Chad Lavella, brought a case to the Supreme Court of the state of New York in Nassau County. And in that argument, it was all constitutional based. It was all based on the merits of law. The State Department of Health said that they had the right through this sanitary code to use very, very, very broad language and do whatever they needed to do in order to keep the public health safe. That sounds reasonable. However, they couldn't provide the court with the law that said you have the right to mask people. So these are just excerpts, and I'm going to read them very quickly, and then there's going to be 3 more slides we're going to slip right through that you can go back and actually read the judge's decision. The court holds that 10 NYCRR 2.6 promulgated and enacted unlawfully by an executive branch. That means the executive branch used a regulation system to basically create law-like regulations. So therefore, because they did that, that regulation is void and unenforceable. The court also said that it could not find any law, and I was in the courtroom. They repeatedly asked the state to provide the law over and over, and the state couldn't provide anything but this sanitary code with broad language. The court said that they cannot find any law enacted by the state legislator that specifically gives the Department of Health the authority to enact law. So they're basically saying the state legislature would have to say, hey, Department of Health, we're giving you the right to create laws. That didn't happen, and it doesn't exist. Furthermore, the court can find no law to which the respondents point that would serve as a host law for which 2.60 was taken. Nowhere in the public health law is the commissioner bestowed the authority to make a law. And the reason why the commissioner of the Department of Health is not bestowed the right to make law is because we don't elect the Department of Health commissioner. We don't elect the Department of Education commissioner. We don't elect any commissioner of any agency or any department under the executive branch. The governor appoints them. So the only people in the whole entire state, and then the only people in the whole entire country, are our elected representatives. They are the ones that can go to Capitol Hill or go down to DC, if they're the US representatives, and create law. And there's a process for that. So the most important thing, which we have been saying all along, is that they have violated the SAPA, State Administrative Procedure Act. That is a law. And basically, in layman's terms, if you want to go in as an agency to change your regulations, you can't just go behind closed doors and rewrite your own policy and regulation. You need to bring it through a public process. And there has to be 60 days notice, public notification, and then public comment. They did not do that. They didn't do it in August, and they didn't do it in November, and they didn't do it in December. Department of Health failed 3 times to do it. Do you know when they did it? December 15th, way after the fact, because now they know that they can't keep extending the emergency procedure, the emergency regulation. They've got to get it into regulation. All right, next slide. I hope I'm making sense. It's a lot. These are all, just go through the next 3 slides, Monique, because they are the decision. So after, on Monday night, when this decision came about, districts were faced with the decision to to keep the mask or not. And it was a constitutional argument, and it was deemed unconstitutional, illegal, and unlawful. And it was also 2.60, which is the directive that was giving us all of these restrictions for the kids. It was deemed void and null. So how do you continue to enforce something that's void and null? So for 24 hours, it was void and null. However, in an effort to keep everybody in the state lulled into submission, there was an immediate statement coming from the Department of Education that there was an automatic stay. And it threw everybody in the state into a tailspin. This was not true. There was no automatic stay. And the districts that decided on Monday night to stay with the masks, when that stay wasn't produced by morning, they quickly, some of them, school had already started, and they said, take the masks off, because they knew they were violating the Constitution. The stay didn't come until 5 o'clock at the end of that day. But this is just yet another example, just like they threatened the districts, if you vote for that executive order of Blakeman, we're going to take your funding, we're going to pull your superintendent's certificate, we're going to remove the boards. Well, on January 20th, when Massapequa voted, none of that happened. So what are we living under? Are we like, kids and parents are threatening us? Or are we actually a land of law? Are we still a land where the Constitution reigns supreme? Or are we just going to listen to people who just throw things out, and because they have an acronym in front of their name, we think that it's law? Next slide, please. So this just is, Bruce Blakeman held a press conference on Tuesday asking the governor to stand down, and he concurred that he had read the decision and that the decision was solid based on the merits of law and based on the Constitution, and he felt it was rock solid. Next slide, please. This is just the 3 branches of government, just for your own edification. I'm not going to go into it, but all 3 branches of government need to have equal power. They work in a checks and balance system. And when one part starts acting autonomously, recklessly, without the Constitution, outside of the law, that is not okay. And that is when the elected officials and the people need to start pushing back and demanding the right process to be had. Next slide, please. It's really important to understand that agencies cannot make law. They just can't. Regulations cannot make law. Regulations support laws. So this is just a little flow chart. If you follow the darker boxes, the way a bill should happen is the darker boxes. Legislative branch, Assembly and Senate comes together. They have a bill. Number 2, the legislative branch debates it and passes or fails it. Number 3, it goes to the executive branch. The governor can veto it or sign the bill. It becomes a law. And then number 4, the executive branch and the unelected agency officials who are appointed by the governor, they support the law and they enforce it. And then regulations are built around that law. That's the process that we should be living in, but we're not. What we're living in right now is when something's unpopular or something is against our rights, they just take it right off of the floor and they follow that red arrow down and they just keep going down to that unelected agency official. And by the way, it doesn't have to be the Department of Health. It doesn't have to be the Department of Education. We have somewhat of 30 different departments that have appointed commissioners. And through the SAPA process, those commissioners have the right to amend, revise, revoke their own regulations. So basically, they're just bringing anything that's unpopular, anything that's tyrannical, anything that's unconstitutional, and they're bringing it through the regulation process. And the process for that, if you follow the yellow boxes, is the agency basically makes a regulation. If it was just a regular regulation, not one that's illegal, they would say, hey, we need this regulation to support this law, and we're going to submit it through SAPA so everybody in the state can go on the state register and check it out, and they can give their feedback. And then our agency is actually going to make a decision. They have one group called the ARRC, and it's a committee.
Be quiet. I'm trying to ask my dad something.
Can we just mute? whoever that, thank you. That, we'll get to the AARC in a second. The AARC does not approve the regulation. They just say, all right, we're looking at it. It's good. We review the information. They give everything back to the agency, and the agency themselves approves their own regulation change. So that is absolute. There's no checks and balances there. Next slide, please. That is how everything is going to be passed in the next 4 to 6 weeks. The New York State Executive Branch is usurping the lawmaking power of your elected officials. And we need to let them know that we know that this is happening. So you need to find out who your state assembly person is and your state senator is. And you need to start calling them up and writing them letters and asking them to take a look at this and asking them to speak up and start talking and speaking out about regulations. You can go to the next slide, about regulations that are not supported by law and that are basically violating the rights of all 19 million New Yorkers. Just because you say something over and over again doesn't make it law. The masks were never a law. That was proven. It was proven. That decision last week still is in effect. The stay just means, wait a minute, while we're appealing, don't everybody take your mask off, because we know we won't be able to get those masks back on you if you remember how life is without masks for the children. So just keep those masks on while we figure some stuff out. That's what a stay is. But the decision last week has not been overturned, and it still stands, and it is unconstitutional until the state appeals it and it goes through the appellate process, and the appeals courts tell them that it's reversed. So just because Kathy goes on national television and says, put a mask on, 19 million New Yorkers, the next day, when pushed by 30 different county executives, and they said, you know what, we're not enforcing this 2 weeks before Christmas, she went on and said, oh, by the way, and these were her words, New York, she says that New York will not be forcing counties to comply with the mask mandate going into effect today. This was back in December. Some executives say they will not. I do hope, though, that the businesses will enforce this. So now she's looking to the everyday American New Yorker to basically violate our fellow citizens' rights, because she hopes that that's what's going to happen. And she says she's going to base that not on law, but on the fact that individuals will understand how important it is. So saying something over and over doesn't make it law. And that's what's happening in this state. People just keep repeating things that are not law, and then other people say it is law. Next slide.
Margaret, I just want to let you know that I put this find your senator and find your assemblyman in the chat.
Oh, you're the best, Pauline. Thank you. Next
You're
slide.
welcome.
So this is the part of, oh, go back to the complying. The only thing that's breathing life, go back one slide. The only thing that's breathing life into these determinations that are not legal is the fact, go to the next one forward, is the fact that we're breathing life into it. And every single time you get out of your car to go into a supermarket or go into a deli or go into, you know, a sporting event and you're wearing a mask, you're breathing life into it. Now, I'm not telling you that you're not going to be denied entry. You might be, and there might be a confrontation that might happen. But if you continue to comply, we're never getting out of this, ever. And to completely comply just because it's easier isn't an excuse. And they will use the masks as a bait and switch. So we really need to all start not complying. At the end of the day, even if it was a legal mandate, a mandate's still not law. And we have a beautiful thing in this country called the Constitution that grants us inalienable rights. So we have to stop. If we're upset that our children are wearing masks and we're still putting on a mask to go into McDonald's or Starbucks, we're the problem. So next slide, please. I go everywhere without a mask. I am rarely, confronted. And if I am, I just say, no, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. I don't get into it. I just keep walking and I know my rights. New York State right now, this is the really important part, and this is how it ties into last Monday's Supreme Court decision. Last Monday's Supreme Court decision said the process in which the governor took to circumvent the legislature to keep an entire state, 2.60 is keeping an entire state in masks right now, keeping teachers in a vax test cycle, quarantining people, and keeping children in masks. The entire process was illegal, unlawful, and unconstitutional, and the document is void. So that is the circumventing of the legislative process. They know that the jig is up. They know they can't keep going on with emergency regulations. So now they're going to go through the SAPA process. And this is where it gets tricky, so stick with me. State Administrative Procedure Act is a law. It is the law that basically an agency to change any regulation from emergency to permanent must go through this process. Once a regulation is approved by its own entity, its own Department of Health or its own Department of Ed or any other department, it's considered permanent and it will have the full weight of the law. Next slide, please. That is why we have to stop these next few things that we're going to be showing you from getting into permanent regulation under any of these departments' regulations. The application and the use of SAPA is done by all of these. This is just a sampling, all of these different agencies. And they basically go through the Rules and Regulations Committee. And if you look down in the purple highlight, SAPA generally applies to any department, board, bureau, commission, division, office, council, committee, or officer of the state, or to any public benefit corporation or public authority that has at least one member. Listen to that. One member who is appointed by the governor and is authorized by law to make regulatory rules. So regulatory rules are benign in and of itself. Regulatory rules become tyranny when they usurp the legislature and they start putting in regulations that violate our constitutional rights, our human rights, and our civil rights. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture of the New York State Register. All of these links are here. I implore you to go back into this PDF and really look and check around for yourselves. This is just a sample. If you look where it says the proposed regulations, that was all submitted on December 15th. Those 4 are under the New York State Department of Health, and 3 out of the 4 of them are not specific to COVID, but they are specific to communicable diseases like COVID. And one of them is, look at the first one, which is under the proposed regulations. It says amendment. Yep. If you look at that first one, I'm sure a lot of people have been following the bills and the laws that are going up in Albany this session. There was one that was pulled. It was A00416, and it was the investigation of communicable diseases, isolation and quarantining camps. They pulled that, and everybody was happy because we were protesting it and we were writing letters, and they said, oh, we're pulling it. So we thought we won, but we didn't win. They actually just walked it down the hall to the Rules and Regulations Committee and said, you know what, this is really unpopular. Nobody wants to vote for this and have their name assigned to this. So we're just going to slip it right on through to the regulatory process. And we're going to make this bill that was proposed and had 2 sponsors. We're just going to pull it and we're going to make it into regulation. It's just going to sit there in the Department of Health's regulation rules, permanent rules that have the weight of law until we need it. So that's what they're doing. It's bait and switch. Next slide, please. So those, we're going to go through, there's about 5 of them that are really of concern. This poor guy, he's a really nice guy, Senator Felder. He is, he's the chairperson for this Administrative Regulations Review Commission, but all they do is review it. They don't vote. There is no committee. There are no other senators that meet with him. It's just basically a process that it goes through this committee. Once all of the public comments are collected by the entity. So, for example, Department of Health wants to pass that isolation quarantine. They put it in the state register, legal. Everybody, we're going to do this. We're giving you 60 days notice. 60 days notice comes and goes, they get 100 complaints and 100 positives. We want this, we don't want it. All of those comments go to the Department of Health. The Department of Health could bring it to Felder. He just reviews it and it goes back to the Department of Health and they say, looks good, let's make it permanent. That's the process for these regulations. Next slide. In very, very simple layman's terms. This is just another photograph of the New York State Register and basically taking emergency regulations and turning it into emergency proposals. And those emergency proposals can be extended within the register for, I think, 2 60-day terms until they actually have to make a move and do something with them to make them permanent. Next slide, please. This is just another picture of another department. It's the Office of Mental Health. This week, things are moving so fast, it's insane. We found the first 4 that are of concern, which we'll get into in another slide, in the register. And then another person started researching the New York State Register newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks. And we found where all of the COVID-19 regulations are being buried and pushed through different agencies and departments so that they're sitting there and they're ready. So this is the Office of Mental Health. This is a mask wearing regulation specific to COVID-19. And it's in the Office of Mental Health. And if I believe it says all licensed OMH facilities would have to abide by this regulation, and hospitals that are under the OMH would have to abide by that for indefinitely. Next slide. These are just the cutouts. If you go on the New York State Register, these are the cutouts. If you look under the Department of Children and Family Services, there are 2 there that have concerned regarding COVID-19 and mitigation strategies. The Education Department, that's where they took that nurses giving shots for COVID-19 and they put it under the Education Department. That one is almost ready to come up next week, is the last day. February 3rd is the last day for public comment. The 3 under the Health Department, we have face coverings for the entire state of New York, not just kids, and not specific to COVID-19. We have prevention of COVID-19. I'm sorry, it is specific to COVID-19. We have COVID-19 transmission of COVID covered entities. That is the mandating of vaccinations in all covered entities in the entire state of New York. And covered entities is a broad term. It doesn't define what a covered entity means here. The investigation of communicable diseases, that's that old bill, the 416. That is not specific to COVID-19. And then you have the Office of Mental Health and then the Department of Labor. These are all the ones that we found just trolling through the New York State Register since December 15th up until January 26th. So they're just doing a bait and switch. They are basically holding on to keeping us in some type of lockdown situation right now through this determination. And in the meantime, they're just pushing all of this through the back door. And then they'll lift the mask mandate and everybody will think it's over, but it's not, because all of this is sitting in regulation. And at the drop of a hat, they can decide to enforce it at their will, at their decision of making a health crisis a crisis with no metric and no data, because that's what they've been doing to keep our kids in masks and to keep 19 million people walking around this state in masks since December 10th. Next slide, please. This is also just another explanation of how they utilize the SAPA process. Next slide. Next slide. That's 2.60, just giving you more information. Something to be concerned about. CDC and Fauci came out on January 9th and January 10th and said, not only do the cloth masks and the surgical blue masks, they don't work. We forced your kids to wear them for 2 years and they didn't work. But keep wearing them. Keep wearing them. Why? Why would we follow something that CDC said didn't work? We have followed everything the CDC says. They said, keep the kids 6 feet apart. We kept them 6 feet apart. Keep the kids 3 feet apart, put them closer together. Keep the kids in masks playing outside. Fine. Take the masks off. They're good. We followed every single thing that they said. Why wouldn't we follow this? And it is very, very important to know N95s are not for children. They are not for they're really not for the public. So this is all here. This is the COVID-19 New York State interim guidance. It says it right there. Just beware. Do not let there be a bait and switch going from cloth masks to N95s. If a teacher wants to wear it, or if a kid wants to wear it, or an adult wants to wear it, that's their choice. But there is absolutely no way that this switchover is going to happen where we say, hey, wait a minute, these masks haven't been working. And our rates in our schools have been amazing. Since September 2020, they have the data and they don't share it out because it doesn't help their story. They have the data from every single building in the state of New York. They know every single case. And not only do they know every case, they know the name of the person, the phone number, the address, who lives in that person's house. They were contact tracing left and right. We were the safest places in the state of New York, and they never let us up. But you can go to an Islander game and be indoors and sit next to somebody who might have COVID and you'll never know, wearing a mask that doesn't work. So it just doesn't make sense anymore. And the time for negotiating on a pathway out is over. These masks need to come off now. And they are going to come off through this Supreme Court decision because what they are doing to us is unconstitutional. Next slide, please. So next slide again. So we talked a lot about the DOH. Keep going. This is the education one. The education one is coming in through the Board of Regents. That's a different department. So the Board of Regents put it up on this through the SAPA process. They're going to try and make your school nurses be have ability to give COVID-19 tests in your schools. And they are also going to make them be able to give them, if they're not without a doctor's note, basically, that is your child's doctor. They also are going to give them the ability to give all immunizations, including ones under emergency use authorization, which means they're not approved by the FDA. This is the Board of Regents schedule. It's a little bit about the Board of Regents. Next slide. The Board of Regents isn't a test, I like to tell people. It's actually a group of people who make decisions for the educational system in New York State, and it's headed by Betty Rosa, who's our commissioner. Next slide. Again, this is all here. We're skipping through it because it's all here for you to go back if you want to go deeper. This is the hierarchy of the Board of Regents and their contact phone numbers. Next slide. This is really important. If you could read the last paragraph, this is a letter from Betty Rosa on December 30th. So it's all about the nurses and the nurses being able to give shots in the classroom, on the campuses. It was, if you remember, I know I've told you a ton of stuff already, but in October, they made an emergency regulation similar to 2.60. They made a different regulation. They said, oh my gosh, we're in a crisis. We need to be able to get our nurses to be able to give shots in the campuses. So that was emergency. That couldn't go on forever. Department of Education knew that they had to go through the SAPA process, so they put it in November 3rd.
Maybe you better close that.
60 days is up February 3rd. And the last paragraph is really, really important because it's basically telling you it's a done deal. If adopted as emergency rule on the January 2022 Regents meeting, for the emergency rule will become effective January 17th. So we are living under the emergency rule right now. Your nurses are capable of giving a shot on your campuses. It is anticipated that the proposed rule will be presented to the Board of Regents for permanent adoption at the Board of Regents' February meeting, after publication in the State Register and expiration of the 60-day public comment period. So they knew the right thing to do. The Department of Health, they did it right. They get an A+. The Department of Education gets an A+. Department of Health failed 3 times. They didn't know this to do this process. So this is basically a done deal. And the way to protect yourself is to make sure that you let your schools know that under no circumstance your child is ever to get any type of administrated test or shot from a school official. That is something that you all should be, just jot a note, put it in my kid's file. put it on the nurses, send it to the nurses department and just say, no way, my kid, absolutely, I do not consent. Next slide. The next slide just goes really deeper into what that amendment, what that regulation will say, which I already said it. It's to give the shots just not only for COVID-19, but attachment A is the all immunizations and including the EUA. Next slide. So and this is just entering a critical time period that we have all of these SAPA regulations, SAPA, all of these regulations going through SAPA right now for public comment period. And although the departments themselves look and review and accept their own changes, it doesn't mean that we can't be vocal and we can't act. So that's really, the next few slides, we're going to talk about acting, but before we move on to acting, I really just want to drive home how important this Supreme Court decision was from last Monday. I feel like I'm a broken record. I feel like all I do is listen to myself talk. I can't even listen to myself anymore. But that Supreme Court decision is the basis for how they are getting around the system. And that judge basically said, you cannot do this anymore. You cannot abuse the regulatory process. You cannot legally make regulations that pretend that they're laws. You can't create law through regulation. He said it every which way. I was in the courtroom on Monday, and he said it by asking questions of the health department defense team, and they couldn't give an answer. And then when you read his decision, he reiterated that laws are to be made in one part of our system, the legislative body. That is it. That is the only place. Commissioners they're not elected by the people, and they don't have the ability to make law. And there isn't a law stating that a commissioner has the ability to make law. That is what you have to walk away from tonight with, is to understand how important it is. And that is why the state is fighting it tooth and nail, because it doesn't make sense that on January 21st, after Massapequa made their vote that at the expiration of the kid masking, they weren't going to be enforcing it anymore. And the next day, Governor Hochul came on national television and said, I don't know why Massapequa even bothered to vote, because it was expiring anyway on the 21st of February. And then 5 days later, she's appealing it. She's going through a stay for something that's going to expire that, she didn't have any power to make it extend. It's because we've caught on to the process and all the pieces are being put together. And that's what they're fighting. They can't let this Supreme Court decision stand, because if it stands, they can't do this backdoor lawmaking through regulation. Next slide. So we must act now to protect our rights. I am going to redirect you again, next slide, to the People's Coalition for New York. On their website is a full call to action. And I am all for everybody doing, all the groups, getting the word out there. You all have different audiences. Everybody's got different networks. I am all for that. But this particular call to action, the one on the right that's yellow, it says urgent call to action, is very specific, and it has to be done in a very specific way. And the ladies at the coalition, they have everything written down, and you have to follow the process in order to do a public comment. And it has to be done the right way. Otherwise, it'll just be discarded. So I urge you all to go to the website and follow the call to action. Just a couple of things. You can't cut and paste. They ignore the ones that are duplicates. And also each individual regulation. So the one for the face covering, the one for the isolation camps, and the one for the mandated vaccines for covered entities, all have to have 3 different emails. Still can come from the same person, but it has to be 3 different emails. All of that is spelled out for you on their website. So please go to their website, sign up, and you'll get notifications, and it's really just a wealth of information over there. The other call to action is on your left, and that is for every single New York State resident. If you are a New York State resident and you live in a district, you have the right to go to your board meetings and speak. I ask you to be kind. They're all volunteers. But you have the right to ask them to unmask the children. And you have the right to ask them to go on the record on where they stand. And I'm telling you this right now, if they don't stand with the children after 2 years, and after all the studies, I won't go into it. I'm sure you're all very well versed. I just saw another study just before I hopped on about children with speech impediments. I think it's up 343% speech issues, not speech impediments. We have children's suicide, self-harm up 300%. We have a study out of Brown University, a drop in IQ of 22 points. This is harming, irreparable harm to an entire multitude of generations, because it's not just one generation. It's going to span 2 or 3 generations of kids that are growing up with these restrictions. We need board members who are going to speak up for the children, who are unencumbered, not compromised, and they are not afraid to ask the questions. So if your board members cannot do that for you now in February, they're not going to be able to do it for you after May. So run for your Board of Education or find somebody to run and support them. But if your board members are not speaking for you, it is time for everybody to get involved in their local government. It is the most influential position in the sense that you see your board members in your town. You can talk to them. You can call them up. And you need to get involved. Next slide, please.
Hey, Margaret, I
Yeah.
just wanted to also mention that on the website, when you click on urgent action on from our website homepage, there are actually 5 emails, 5 individual emails to write. There's 4 proposed rules from New York State Department of Health and 1 proposed rule from NYSED.
Okay, thank you, Monique. Sorry about that. She's the tech girl. She's the brains behind the operation. I'm going to ask you to do some things that are uncomfortable. And I have to tell you, we did two Zooms last week. And I know all of us got feedback that people kind of, this resonated with people. Exit your echo chamber. Your social media has probably become an echo chamber with people who completely, maybe even your social circles. You need to reach out to those people who maybe don't completely agree with you, and you need to share information with them. Every single bit of information that is on this slideshow is apolitical. It is the way our government works. It doesn't matter who you voted for in 2020. It doesn't matter where you registered, who you registered to vote, you know, what party you are. None of that matters. This is all about defending a republic, defending the government that was set forth by the Constitution. That's not political. That's not political at all. And to have those conversations and bring it back to the basics of process makes it a little bit easier, because you're not arguing whether you agree with the mask or not, whether you agree with the vaccine or not, whether you agree with 6 feet or not. What you're saying is we all have a right to choose. And that's what all of this is about. Every single person has inalienable rights, and they have the right to choose how they want to live. They have the right to choose how to raise their children. They have a right to choose every single minute of their day, the actions that they take. So have these conversations and get on your social media and get into media groups and start asking them to cover this information. I just got a whole list of articles put out by one specific organization, and an organization that's related to education. And they had articles from all over the whole state of New York. They didn't have the article about the Supreme Court decision or the Supreme Court stay. How is that possible? Just because you don't put it out there doesn't mean it didn't happen. But that's what they're doing to us. They're manipulating us through the media. And we need to be aware, and we need to share information, and we need to have those hard conversations. Next slide. Monique, did I lose you? This is tips for social media. I'm not really great at it. So you can go back on here and figure out how to do it. It basically, gives you a few hashtags. If you have hashtags that you're using, if you're not familiar with how to go on social media and really advocate, this is just a little how-to. Next slide, please. I just want everyone, I think we have a lot of people that are coming in from other parts of the state. We in Nassau County have a county executive that gave us the right to not wear a mask. He took away that mask mandate by not enforcing it. And he directed his agencies that he's in control of, the cops, the fire marshals, and the Department of Health. And he said, you're not going to enforce it. He did it in the form of an executive order, but all of these counties did it verbally. When it all came out, when the new determination that replaced all the other determinations came out in December, these counties came out and said, no, we are not enforcing it. Our police, this isn't their job. Our Department of Health has other things to do. We are not enforcing it. So please do not comply. Nobody's getting a fine. Small businesses are not going to get fines, especially if you live in these districts. Suffolk County did go on the record in December and say, because I just saw someone come up, say that he is not enforcing it. We do have that somewhere. Next slide, please. He might have changed his tune, but in December, he said he wasn't enforcing it. This is just another staying informed, updating calls to action. Go to the People's Coalition. Next slide, please. And I just want to also say that the lawyer that brought this to the Supreme Court last week, Chad Lavella, he was just a dad. And for the longest time, so many people were saying, where are the lawyers? Where are the lawyers? We need the lawyers. We just need somebody to help us. Well, unbeknownst to pretty much anybody until last Monday, Chad was that guy, and he was a lawyer, and he said, you know what, what's going on is wrong. It didn't sit right with him. And he went back and he found the mechanism. Everyone knew it was wrong, or a lot of us knew it was wrong. We knew it was unconstitutional. We had a hunch that it was illegal, but nobody was giving us that validation. And Chad actually went and did the work, and he isn't a constitution lawyer. He's not an administrative lawyer either. And he went back and he did the work, and he figured out the mechanism in which they are basically usurping legislature. We all knew it was happening, but we didn't understand the mechanism. And the mechanism is this backdoor regulation. So he really is just the brains behind the whole operation. Your boards can call a vote at any time. They don't need an executive order to call a vote. Your boards can also, this is very important because I see it coming down since Friday, your boards can amend their opening plans. And this year's opening plans were not submitted to the state. Last year's 2020s were. They were submitted to the state and they had to be approved by the state. This year it was a framework, and they are amenable at any point if a board wants to amend them. And a board can call a vote. They need one member to call it and a second one to second it. And then the resolution can go. Whether it passes or not is a different story. But the vote can be taken if you can get someone to make a motion and a second. Next slide. And it's really incumbent on people, the everyday people, to ask your boards to do this. I just want to very quickly talk about, I call it the trifecta. If you look at the bottom in the opposed section, it says withdrawn by sponsor. That's the 416 that everybody thought was gone, but it's really not, it's in regulation. Then you have the 8371, which is in the top right corner of the opposed column. So that one is the immunization program for the students. And then the bottom one is the one that is given consent, I believe. Am I reading it right? Yes, that the 14 years or older, your child can get a shot at school without your consent. So these are bills that are rumbling around up in Albany. If you take those two, the consent bill, the mandatory vaccination bill, and you couple it with the regulation from NICED that school nurses are going to be able to give shots, That's the trifecta right there. And that's what they're going towards. The next slide. And they're not going to let the masks up because that's how they're going to segregate your children. I just want to make mention to this. This petition is still on the People's Coalition. It is against all mandatory COVID-19 vaccines for kids. It was most of, I think the first 43,000 signatures were delivered to our elected officials in some capacity. And it was put together by two amazing ladies out in Suffolk County. And they did the hard work, and they basically made sure that all, I think 150 members got it in some capacity, whether it was on a thumbnail drive or if it was printed out and hand delivered to them. But they got this petition to elected officials. The next slide, please. On Friday, I just want to mention, we put out a call to action locally to get in touch with your local state and assembly people and state senators. And by Friday afternoon, we had a letter from 12 of them, basically saying to Governor Hochul, stand down, stop the appeal, because this appeal violates our right as elected officials to vote for what the people want. And that is really like an important thing that you can be asking your assembly people and your senators. And I don't know, Monique, if it's already on the People's Coalition. I don't think it's in this slideshow, but we will put that call to action on what you should say to the assembly people. And you need to call both sides of the aisle. It's not just the Republicans, it's the Democrats too, because it's their rights as elected officials that are being usurped. It's their power that's being circumvented by using this regulatory process. And it has nothing to do with the masks. It has everything to do with the Constitution. So, you know, just really think about what you're going to do this week. That's something that you can really do from your desk at your office or your kitchen and in your car, and just give them a quick call or send them a quick email and say, hey, listen, can you please work with your colleagues and on behalf of the constituents, fight for your right to vote to have your voting powers, you know, restored, and vote for what the constituents want. This is just another how to prepare and organize. Find small groups of people, start meeting in your living room, start sharing information. You can share this Zoom. You can share the Zoom from last week where it goes deeper into 2.60 and share the website and all of the information that's on it. Next slide, please. This is just, we're not going to talk about this, but just so that you know, the United States Supreme Court has consistently upheld the constitutional rights of parents. And these are all of the cases that another amazing lady compiled, and we checked it out with a lawyer, and all of them are real cases, but they are really something that you should really kind of look into and just be reminded that even though the government and you know, the schools are acting like we don't have a choice, we do. We have a choice. We have a choice every single day on how our children are treated in the schools and what their rights are and how we can protect our children's rights. So with that, I think I covered everything for tonight. If you can keep on watching this, you know, the stay and what's going on with the stay. Chad Lavelia is on Facebook. You can like him on Facebook. I'm sure he has maybe an Instagram page. I'm not on Instagram, but he does give updates and information, you know, every couple of days, just to like reassure everybody where they're at. He was interviewed last night. I think that the video was taken down, but he basically, you know, said everything that we're saying here today, that the decision stands. The decision is still standing. That has not been overturned. And for the governor of New York State to say on Friday afternoon that, I think her word was, we had a little blip in the masking, a blip. So her viewpoint of a Supreme Court judge's constitutional ruling based on the Constitution, based on law, is a blip. It just didn't really sit right with me. And it just has, in my opinion, just given me more drive to keep fighting and keep educating New York State. And one of the reasons they've gotten away with this is because we've all been asleep at the wheel. All of us. We're busy. We have families. We have businesses. We have, older parents, young kids, whatever it is. We have life. And nobody has the time to sit and say, well, what's new in the new, the weekly register? We don't have time. And they banked on that. They banked on that we trusted them. They banked on that we thought the system was working for us. And we need to remind them that we voted them in. We need to remind them that they took an oath to the United States Constitution. And we need to remind them that they better start working towards keeping that oath and every single thing that that oath represents in the Constitution. And the main thing that it represents is that all laws are passed by the legislature because the legislature is voted in by the people, by the constituents. So that's the argument. And I heard on Friday when some people were calling some elected officials down here on Long Island, that the argument turned into, well, I support masks. That's not the argument. And don't let them take it there. That is not the Supreme Court decision last week. They didn't even mention why a kid should be in a mask or not in the courtroom. They asked legally, what is the law that is granted to the governor or the Department of Health that is empowering them to keep a mask on anyone in the state? And the answer was, we don't have one. That's the answer. Because if they wanted to make it law, last September, they had the chance. They knew how to bring them back for the extension of the rent forgiveness. They knew they had to pass that in the assembly. And by the way, in September, bills were brought to the floor. And one of the bills that was brought to the floor, it didn't go anywhere yet, was the mandatory vaccination of the kids. It was rumbling around that floor. It got a second sponsor and it was there. So they were doing their everyday business. They didn't just go up there to deal with rent forgiveness. Any assembly person or the governor could have said, hey guys, I need this to be put into law. Let's make a law. They didn't do that because they know that it is absolutely against the Constitution and they're never going to win it. So we just have to keep the pressure on. We just have to keep smart, be smart, and use all the mechanisms that our government has given us and keep the pressure on. So that's it. I thank the ladies from the coalition again. And I think someone wrote that there wasn't a video from the other night, but I think there is the video from the other night. It's pretty much the same. The front part of it is really more heavy on the education and all the different back and forths with the education. But I really feel like at this point, we can't just focus on education. We have to focus on the entire state. We have to activate 19 million people and make them understand, if you want to wear a mask, that's your choice. If you don't want to wear a mask, or you don't want to have to get tested every single time you walk into your office or your school or your hospital, or you don't want to lose your job because you don't want to do something, that all needs to be something that we all fight for collectively, because all of it is against the Constitution. And this case, if it stands, is going to pave the way, but we all have to be diligent. So thank you so much, everybody.
There
And
are a couple of hands up
yep.
that have been up for a while, so
Yep.
we don't generally take a lot
Let me
of
just plug
questions.
in. Let me just plug in because I'm about to go dead.
Yep. And also Vicky Savini, if you're still on, would you just mind hopping in with your audio just to make the correction, since you are the one who was very instrumental and behind getting that packet together.
I'm sorry. Did I misspeak?
Oh,
That's okay, Margaret.
I'm sorry.
it actually wasn't 150 of the assembly, because many of the assembly are actually against vaccinating the children, mandating that.
Okay.
We focused on the health committee because we knew our original plan was going to be to deliver those to all 150 members on the 5th, but we knew she was going to be locking down everyone and locking us out. So we just focused on the people that we knew through lobbyists who will definitely vote for vaccinating our children. And in that package, we had over 36,000 signatures, but now it's well up over 50,000. And we had all of the stats that were current from bearers. We also had flyers that we made up with different stories focusing on youth from Real Not Rare. So it was a very impactful package. However, when we had people follow up with them, the people who were for that particular bill were not very happy with us, which I don't really care, to be honest with you. So my intent was just to show them that there are more people in New York that care than they think. So, but it wasn't 150, but I mean, that's not to say that we won't send more packages out if we need to.
And they can go out digitally as well, right?
What'd you say?
They can go out digitally as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you, Vicky. Thanks for your work.
Can I ask,
clarifying
can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yep, hold on one second. I just want to say this. We don't generally do questions and answers after these, and we ask and encourage people to email us. If we want, we could take a couple of really quick ones, but we're going to ask that because it's already, we're an hour and 20 minutes. So yeah, if you have something really important that can be easily and quickly answered, if not, or shared, if not, we'll ask you to email us. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it is a real quick question. My question is what is New York State doing on gun rights? Only because if they can disarm the people, they can do whatever they want with these COVID vaccines and anything else that they want. And I think we should also be focusing our attention on what they're doing with the gun rights.
I don't have any information on that. I think it's, you know, something that certainly people can look at. It's a constitutional right. I don't know if anybody here has any information on that. I haven't seen any pending legislation regarding that swirling around, but I wasn't really looking either. So
Supposedly something's supposed to come out about the gun rights through, again, the Department of Health under mental health. That's supposed to be coming down the pike under another mental health mandate. That's the way they're supposed to push it through. That's
So,
what-
you know, like Margaret said, I think everybody has been asleep at the wheel for a long time because we were handed a very free country and a very comfortable life in a lot of ways. So we just all have to be paying attention, and everybody's going to have different things that matter more to them or they think are most important. So we just encourage you all to stay engaged, stay on top of your representatives, make sure you know who you're electing and what they stand for. You know, and do the research to see what kind of stuff is floating around out there so you know what you have to lobby against. And that's one of the points of the coalition, right? We're becoming like a pack of groups of like freedom fighting groups and individuals so that we can lobby ourselves, you know, as groups with a lot of power behind us. So that's the idea, support and defend our Constitution together. Anybody else with a quick?
I just have a clarification.
Uh-huh.
Did she say that the stay does not override the judgment based on the Constitution?
Yes. So right now, the stay is temporary. What they went back to court for on Friday was to argue the stay. Okay, the stay doesn't change the decision. The stay is literally what it says: stay in place, pause, don't take the masks off. We're going to keep the status quo while we're figuring this out. And then my understanding, just from listening to Chad last night and also speaking to him on Friday, I believe everything had to be in by 5 o'clock, so they were not expecting a decision on Friday. They're expecting a decision hopefully like Monday, Tuesday this week. That decision will determine which side will appeal. And I think that they're all expecting that this goes to the next level, regardless of which side wins the permanent stay.
So parents should continue to not mask their kids, send them to school and not mask.
I am a firm believer of civil disobedience.
Okay, so it would be civil disobedience. That's the question. Thank you.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm sorry, can I ask, I want to share something. So I had a connection with the councilwoman in Brooklyn, Ina Vernikov, who connected me with her chief of staff who knew Simcha Felder's chief of staff, the chairman of the ARRC commission. So when we gave the chief of staff of, his chief of staff call, they had no idea what I was talking about. They said that there's no vote that's going to take place by them, by his commission. What they informed me is the Department of Health agency that's proposing these rules via the New York State Register, they are going to be the ones voting on them themselves.
Yes.
I couldn't believe it. So that's, so basically, it's not some commission
No.
of senators that are voting on this.
No, no, and that's what I said. So, you know, he does this, like, they call it a review committee. And then the girl who was researching it actually texted me while we were on, and she said, because she's been in touch with Felder's office too, she said Felder doesn't even review it according to his guide. So basically they rewrite their own regulations. They pretend that there's a process that goes through this ARRC. Nobody can really figure out what this ARRC chairman position does. It just is like, kind of goes through him, I guess. And it goes back to the department. And by the way, it's not just the Department of Health, it's any of those departments. It's the Child and Family Services, it's the Office of Mental Health, it's, you know, the Department of Correction. It's any department that decides to change their own regulation has no oversight by any elected official. So what you're saying is 1000% right, and it is mind-blowing. And this is now, like I said, the regulatory process and the SAPA process has a benign basis. It wasn't meant to be used this way, but now they're using it this way, and they just keep pushing in. And I implore all of you to go back, because I went over it real quick for time's sake. Go back and read what they did it in 5 different departments that we could figure it out. You know, and this isn't what we do for a living. We could figure out that they did it. They shoved those COVID-19 restrictions into 5 separate departments. And, you know, last week we only found 4 of them. And then this weekend we found a few, you know, the other departments and the other regs. And I kept saying to myself, but why? I know they have the bill floating around for the mandatory vax for the kid, but why wouldn't they put it through the regulatory process? Because they're putting everything else through the regulatory process. And then we found something under the Child and Family Services, which is very loosely based. And anything that is loosely based, we need to worry, because that is how they have us under this determination right now. The Department of Health is using a sanitary code, like the code that says you have to put a sign in the bathroom that says your employees need to wash your hands. That's the code that they're enforcing masks under. And when the judge says, but where does it say masking? They said, but it's broad. It's broad terminology. It's broad language. So the broader the language, the worse off we are. And that's when I revert back to that covered entities in New York State are going to all have vaccine mandates. What is a covered entity? What is it? You go into the registry newsletter, they don't describe it. They don't say anybody who, you know, gets $1 from the state, or anybody who's on state land, or anybody who's licensed by the state. A covered entity could be anything. So this is really a call to action to wake up New York. Wake up New York. If the information that you got from you should be spreading that far and wide in your networks. And that's really the whole point.
I'm so sorry.
I hate to cut people short, but it's 9:30.
Yeah, quickly, I confronted our board, and your presentation 2 weeks ago really helped a lot in terms of like the laws and constitutionality of everything. But what they go back to is their law firm, and their lawyer keeps saying, oh, we have to listen to the commissioner, and we could lose state funds. They keep saying that. Could it be that the lawyer is corrupt, or the law firm is corrupt? That's number one. And number two, is it true? Will the state really take away the funds?
I'm going to just speak to that really quickly. Yes, it's very possible that the law firms are corrupted. Our judicial system is corrupted. All of our systems are corrupted, and these people are on the money train. They're on the train. And so far, I don't believe. So far, there's been pushback, and nobody's had their funding taken away. Like the district on Long Island that pushed it and had a vote. So we don't think that that's a thing that would happen. But we're going to be putting out another email about some other processes that will really hold these people's feet to the fire, but we're not going to discuss that tonight. Be on the lookout for an email. It is getting really late, and I know others of you have your hands up. We're going to really just ask if you could email us any questions. We'd be happy to answer them. And we're just going to say the answer right now, aside from everything you've been told tonight, but so beautifully by Margaret in this PowerPoint, is civil disobedience, massive civil disobedience. It doesn't matter what law or regulation or anything that is passed at any point in time if people don't comply. Tyranny needs compliance. That's it. So, you know, you have to start doing that. You have to start getting brave and bold if you haven't already, and bringing a friend along for the ride. So anyway, I think we're going to have to end it tonight. I'm sorry, you guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Please do email us with any outstanding questions, concerns, or important information you might want to share with the group. We'll be happy to push it out. Thanks, Margaret.